Hello. Okay. Um, I'm going to let you know that I am recording this on Tuesday evening, early evening. It is election day in the United States. It is I don't want to know who won before I did this, even though it's not going to be up on YouTube until Sunday. But I wanted to share this chapter before everything happens. And God's perfect timing, this chapter, I believe, is perfect for this week. I mean, really perfect for this week. Okay. Because no matter what side you are in politics in the United States, late tonight and tomorrow, there are going to be people feeling some of the feelings that are found in this chapter, and we need to really get to the end of this chapter and see what comes. So, okay. Before we actually start chapter 4, this is our fourth study in the book of Esther, I want to explain something. The concept of sackcloth and ashes. It's used. It actually wasn't just Jews who did this. It was something that was known in the ancient world, and I want to give you a couple examples of what sackcloth and ashes, the ripping of clothes, rending of clothes, what they were supposed to represent. Okay, and that might help us better understand this chapter. So, last week I talked a little bit about Esau and Jacob, the twins that were the sons of Isaac, and Jacob being the father of 12 sons, and the 12 sons became the tribes of Israel. All the Jews are among them. Out of those 12 sons that Jacob had, he showed great favoritism to his son Joseph. He was the 11th son born to Jacob, but he was the firstborn of Jacob's favorite wife. And so he really doted on Joseph. And Joseph's 10 older brothers were not very thrilled about this at all. And Joseph was young at the beginning of the stories that we have of them in Genesis, and he I don't know if it was like he thought himself up there because his dad treated him that way, or if he was just naive and didn't realize how he was coming across to his brothers. But he came across in such a way that they hated him, literally hated him, to the point where most of them wanted to kill him. And one of them talked the rest into saying, okay, let's just sell him into slavery to this caravan coming through, and he will be a slave in Egypt, and we can forget about him. And they did that. And they took Joseph's cloak and covered it with blood and took it back to their father, Jacob, and told him that a lion must have killed Joseph. And Genesis chapter 37 verse 34 is Jacob's reaction to hearing the news of the death of his son Joseph. So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. The rending of clothes, the tearing of clothes, the putting on sackcloth. Here it doesn't necessarily mean ashes, but sackcloth and ashes are always together. In mourning for the loss of his son, mourning for the death of someone he loved so much. So the putting on sackcloth and ashes was a way of showing that you mourned for something, for death that has come. Now, another example of sackcloth and ashes, and I'm only using these two because they're plenty, is in the book of Job. Now, Job is afflicted with all his kids are killed. He's afflicted with these bodily boils, sores on his body, and he never turns his back on God, but he does complain. He complains to God and says, why is this happening to me? What have I done? I have not done. I have lived a righteous life. I have honored only you, Lord. Why are you doing this? Why is this happening to me? Now, how many times have we gone through, oh, why is this happening to me? And God's response was, excuse me? Who do you think you are to talk to me like that? Where were you when I created the universe? And then he goes on to show the enormous difference between man, Job, us, and him. And Job's reaction, he talks about he's already wearing sackcloth. He's in mourning. But then chapter 42, Job 42, verse 6, his reaction to God speaking to him is, therefore I retract. I take it all back. And I repent in dust and ashes. I repent. I'm sorry, Lord. I'm humbling myself before you. This is a sign of humility. So the concept of sackcloth and ashes can be a sign of, well, the sackcloth is a mourning of what we've lost, and the ashes is of humility. But really, the sackcloth and ashes could mean just mourning or just humility. Okay, so we're going to look at chapter 4, which is not a long chapter, so we'll see how long, and it really pretty well reads itself. It turns out to be mostly a conversation between Mordecai and Esther. It's just a back and forth between them. So I'm just going to read each paragraph, each portion of the conversation, and just make a couple comments and then go on. It's a very simple chapter. Okay. It's simple in that it's 17 verses and it's a conversation. To set it up, remember that at the end of chapter 3, we were left with this cliffhanger. It's kind of like a continuing story, one of those Saturday matinee shows that had cliffhangers at the end. Okay, so at the end of chapter 3, Haman has basically tricked the king into allowing Haman to create this edict, this law, that all Jews were to be killed on the 13th day of the 12th month of that year, 11 months into the future. Okay, so this law, this edict, this decree has gone out to all the provinces, including that same city, Susa, where the palace is. So it's come out. Susa was bewildered. Why is this happening? But we continue. Chapter 4. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Okay, so there's great mourning, and many of them were in sackcloth and ashes. And it actually says, some were fasting, weeping, and wailing. Okay, so we have this great mourning. It's this hopelessness that, it's like, what's going to, we're going to die in 11 months. Susa, by the time it gets out to the outlying provinces, it's going to be even less than 11 months. In less than 11 months, we're going to be killed. And there's nothing we can do about it. We're going to be killed. And so they put on sackcloth and ashes. They're in mourning. Death is upon them. Hopelessness envelops them. Okay? So Mordecai is in sackcloth and ashes outside of the king's gate because he can't go in wearing sackcloth. The palace is a place of gaiety and happiness, and everything is wonderful, and we don't want to see the ugliness of the outside world. So if you were in mourning, if you were in sackcloth, you were not allowed in. So he's outside like this. Verses 4 and 5. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, or Hathach. I probably pronounce it Hathach for the rest of this chapter. One of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. Okay, so Esther's like, what's going on here? Send him some clean clothes. It's like something's happened. Let him get cleaned up, and then he can come in. And it's like, and Mordecai refuses to do this. So, like I say, it's just read a little of the conversation. So this is what she told Hathach to do. So, verses 6 through 8. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. He told him to urge her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Stop there for a sec. Okay, so Hathach goes out. Esther says, okay, find out why he won't take my new clothes. Why is he wearing sackcloth and ashes? It's like, go find out for me. And so Hathach goes out and he talks to Mordecai, and Mordecai explains all this. Now, something that caught my eye when I read this, and I have no answer for it. It will be one of those questions that I have never found an answer for in the Bible. I've not noticed. If you've noticed it, write a comment. Where did he find out about this? When Mordecai, in verse 7, Mordecai told him everything that happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. How did Mordecai know that? How did he know the exact amount that Haman had offered to give to the king for the privilege of killing Jews? Not that he mentioned Jews, it just the people. How did Mordecai find that out? Because the king said, "Oh no, don't worry about that." So it wasn't part of the law. It didn't actually even happen. So how does Mordecai know the exact amount? Leads me to speculate that maybe Mordecai knows a few people inside of the palace that have a little bit higher up ranking, and that would have been present at the time. That's a little bit more powerful than you see here in just reading Esther. But it caused me to think, how does he know the exact amount that Haman offered to give to the treasury for the privilege of having these people killed? It's an unanswered question. Don't know. But he knew. He knew. Okay, so then he tells the eunuch, Hathach, that he needs to tell Esther that she needs to go to the king and beg for mercy and plead with the king for her people. Mordecai is telling this is what Esther needs to do. Okay, so Hathach goes back and he relates this, and of course that's what verse 9 is saying. So let me just go back to the Bible. Verses 9 through 11 is going back into the palace. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that he be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the gold scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. So here's Esther's response. She's here like, okay, I get it. But everybody knows, and she's like, the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know. It's like, and you know, Mordecai. It's like, hello, everyone knows that you can't come to the king unless he has summoned you. And if you dare to come into his presence without him having summoned you, you be put to death unless he holds out the gold scepter. And he's got to be in a really good mood and really happy to see you to do that. And oh, by the way, he hasn't asked to see me in over 30 days. She might be the queen, but, you know, as far as she's concerned, she's like, I think he's got a new favorite. You know, amongst all those concubines, there's somebody that's got his attention, and I'm not her. I'm not she. It's been over 30 days that he's cared to see me. It's like maybe, you know, the honeymoon is over, and, you know, yeah, it's if I go, I'll probably be killed, you know, is the understood thing in this comment. So this is this is her response. And so Hathach goes back out to Mordecai, verses 12 through 14. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this. Very famous phrase, for such a time as this. It's often used, and it definitely refers to Esther. But Mordecai is basically saying, just because you're in the palace doesn't mean that you'll be excluded from this edict. You're going to die too. And if you go against, you know, if God has placed you in this position for this precise reason, and you don't follow God's will and the path that he has placed you on, you know what? Two things will happen. You will become nothing. Your family, the family, and Mordecai is part of that family. The family will be gone. It will cease to exist. Will like the Amalekites, when God promised that they were going to cease at some point. It will cease to exist, and you know what? If God's will is to save the Jews, he will bring up somebody else. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. You know what? If you're not going to do it, and it's God's will, he will use another way to deliver us. But who's to say that you are in the exact place you are for this reason, for such a time as this? And so they bring back Mordecai's message, and so Esther responds back to Mordecai. Verses 15 through 17. We'll go through the rest of the chapter. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Okay, end of conversation. So Esther says, fine, this is what we need to do. I need you to get all the Jews together and for 3 days fast. Now, again, remember, God is not mentioned in this book, but he is present. When Mordecai said that if you remain silent, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, we're talking about God providing it. Now she's saying that she wants Mordecai to get the Jews together to fast, that she, Esther, and her maids are also going to fast for 3 days, day and night, no food, no water. And that's tough when you're excluding water for 3 days. Food is hard enough, but water is really pretty serious. And it's implied. When you fast, you pray. Again, it's not mentioned, but God is present in this book. So they are to fast and pray. And at the end of the 3 days, she will go to the king. And even though it's against the law, and if I die, I die. If I perish, I perish. I will do what needs to be done. And if God is with us, if it's God's will, and if not, I perish. Now, and then of course it says Mordecai went and carried out all of Esther's instructions. So, this is the end of the chapter. Why do I say that this chapter is so good for this week? The beginning of this chapter, there is a sense of hopelessness, of everything's going against us. In their case, we're going to die. In less than 11 months, we're going to die. And there's this strong sense of hopelessness. Okay, but where's God in this? Remember, he's not mentioned, but this hopelessness is like, well, where's God? Where's your faith in God? By the end of the chapter, with Esther asking for the fasting and presumed prayer, they're looking to God for hope. That they're leaving behind this hopelessness, this mourning, and now there's a glimmer of hope. Why? It's not them who's going to get them out of this. It's God. And God's path might seem so wrong from our point of view, but it's God knows better. And they're putting their trust, their hope, any hope I have, is in God. And God will see us through. And whatever happens, it's God's will. So, by the time you see this, you will either be fine, happy, or resigned, or in mourning, feeling hopeless. I think the lesson for us is not to get ourselves stuck in the mourning, the hopelessness, but rather to look towards God and look for our hope to be in Him and His path and His will and His wisdom. And when we put our faith in Him, we can have hope. And that is the end of this study of chapter 4, the book of Esther. Next chapter, see, we're left on another cliffhanger, which is good. It's good. Next week, we'll be looking at chapter 5. And chapter 5 will again leave us still with a little bit of a cliffhanger. But by the end of chapter 6, we'll see some resolution. So, until the next time, God bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Goodbye.